Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Vincer, and I'm part of the theatrical programming team here at TIFF. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's screening of The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We're very fortunate to have a special guest with us here this evening to introduce the film. Adam Nayman is a film critic, lecturer, frequent TIFF guest, and author. His latest book is The Coen Brothers, This Book Really Ties the Films Together, which, by the way, is available for purchase on your way out of the cinema tonight after the film at concessions, and is stocked in the TIFF shop downstairs. If you do pick up the book after the film at concessions, there's a good chance that you might run into Adam and he'll sign a copy for you, just FYI. And that might make a great gift for the Coen Brothers fan in your life, just saying. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Adam Nayman.
You guys know this is on Netflix, right? I'm kidding. I'm back here, I think it was just about 3 weeks ago, or a little over maybe a month ago, that I was talking about Fargo. Tiff had me here and very generously sort of did a launch for this book. This here is the big Hanukkah present book on the Coen Brothers, which contains analysis of every film they've made except this one. We tried, because while they were shooting and editing The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, we were in touch with them and in touch with Netflix and really hoping to synergize the release of the book with the release of the series. But if you know anything about the Coens, they tend to play all this stuff pretty close to the vest. And they did not want to talk about the new film and wasn't able to include it. So it's really nice, a month after talking about Fargo, a movie that almost everyone at that screening had seen, I get to now come and talk about a film that I am pretty sure no one here has seen. Did anyone get up at 9 a.m. and watch this already? And now they just want to see this on a big screen? I mean, it's a really rare feeling to talk about something that no one has watched yet, but it also means that I feel very responsible to not spoil anything. So I'm going to refrain from talking very much about the plot or characters or situations of Ballad of Buster Scruggs. And yet, it's also a hard movie to spoil because one thing you may know about it is it doesn't have a single plot. It is an anthology. And this led to a lot of confusion when it was being made and when it was announced. People thought that what the Coens had made was a television series. They thought that these were all going to be long episodes. There was a lot of speculation that they had made a 6-hour miniseries or a 12-hour miniseries. And it was when it was announced for the Venice Film Festival with a running time of like 2 hours and 10 minutes, people were quite confused. And the joke was that the Coens had kind of pulled like a heel turn against television, or the Coens had kind of like put TV in its place and said, we're not making TV, this has always just been a movie. It happens to be in 6 parts. But I thought about the idea of Westerns, and particularly of Westerns on television within the Coens' body of work, and it shows up in an interesting place. I don't know how many of you are fans of The Big Lebowski. How many people have seen The Big Lebowski? Yeah, it's pretty much everybody. I mean, if you're not a fan of The Big Lebowski, I don't know what I have to say to you. The Big Lebowski is a film we all remember, like the most famous lines from it, the most famous jokes. Something that people tend to forget, but I always remember it because I think it's quite hilarious, is the sight gag of Larry's father, the writer Arthur Digby Sellers, who lives in the Iron Lung. If you remember, his occupation is he used to write TV westerns. And the joke in The Big Lebowski, which is a movie that is really based on film noir but brings all these different genres together, is that a writer of this classic 1950s Western series is now very old, almost dead, and on life support in an iron lung in the middle of Los Angeles. And it plays, I think, and people have written about it, and I even talk about it in the book, as a really interesting joke about genre, where the Coens as 90s filmmakers are suggesting that the Western, even if it's not quite dead, it's kind of on life support. That this genre that's so foundational to the history of American cinema, the first American films really largely being Westerns, the first popular American films being Westerns, the first hugely popular cycle of studio films being Westerns, has now kind of come almost to the end. And it's a very morbid joke that this old guy is almost dead sitting in his iron lung. If you know The Big Lebowski, you also know that there's a tumbling tumbleweed that opens the film and seems to drift into Los Angeles, almost like a Western is invading the territory of the film noir. And the film is narrated by Sam Elliott, soon possibly to be Oscar-winning Sam Elliott for A Star is Born. But Sam Elliott in The Big Lebowski, between his white cowboy hat and his folksy drawl and his turn of phrase and the music by Sons of the Pioneers that plays, he's very much a Western figure as well. So the Coens have often played with the tropes of the Westerns and lamented, I think, that the genre has kind of been in a bit of a decline, where they've treated the genre very nostalgically. If you look at a film like No Country for Old Men, or a film like Raising Arizona, or a film like Blood Simple, there are elements of the Western in all these films. But the only pure Western they'd made before this, and in the very minor interviews they've already given about Buster Scruggs, the movie they said inspired them to make Buster Scruggs is True Grit. Now, how many of you have seen True Grit? Again, I don't want to say too much about Buster Scruggs, but I think that if you've seen True Grit, thinking about it, remembering it, calling it to mind is a good way to prepare as you're just about to watch this film. I see a lot of correspondences between the Coens' version of True Grit and their film The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. In their version of True Grit, they were very faithful to Charles Portis's novel. They really tried to make something in the spirit of the book, as opposed to remaking the John Wayne film from 1969. And one thing about the Coens' version of True Grit, however popular it was, it's still their highest grossing film, however crowd-pleasing and funny it was, and however rousing it was, it's a very melancholy film, True Grit. And it's very preoccupied, I think, with matters of death and dying. If you remember when the Hallie Steinfeld character comes into town at the beginning of True Grit, she's coming with the body of her father, and the first exchange she has is with an undertaker in a funeral home. She asks if she can stay the night there because she has no one to stay, and he has this great, funny, but also scary line where he says, if you would like to sleep in a coffin, it would be all right. It's a very sort of grim joke that True Grit opens with. When I was writing about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs today for The Ringer, and other places that I've already written about it, I think it is that idea of a film that is dealing with mortality, that idea of death, that idea of these kind of deeper, darker, mysterious things that I think links it to True Grit and makes it for me in some ways the most mature film they've ever made. As they've gotten older, I think that that idea of mortality and death has crept into their work more and more. And my favorite thing about this film is watching how its shape works. It's very, very funny off the top, and maybe 5 or 10 minutes into the film you're going to wonder how this could possibly transform into a work of deeper seriousness, but I promise that it does. I think that it's an amazing mix of tones. I think that it's an amazing show of talent. Most of the actors in this film are not actors they've worked with before. They're actors who are very interesting to see in a Coen Brothers context, including, for instance, James Franco or Liam Neeson, who are not actors that they've cast previously, but they get strong performances out of. And I think that the last thing I'll say, by the time the film reaches its end, and I'll be curious to know what you'll think afterwards, it strikes me as the most political film that they've ever made. That even in returning to the 19th century, returning to this early foundational period in America, I think it's a film that really puts those values under the microscope and questions them. It's not a coincidence that they make this film in 2018. They're too smart as filmmakers to include a Donald Trump type character. They're too smart as filmmakers to have any dialogue that comes out and says, we're unhappy with the political situation. But I think it's very, very significant that they've made a movie that, in an era of Make America Great Again, a movie that really asks the question, what does that mean? Again, when? When was this country great? Was it great at the moment that it started? The Western is all about the foundations of American myths, American values, American archetypes. And I think that this film questions those things very deeply and very seriously, and by the end, quite devastatingly. I hope that you guys like it as much as I do. I hope if you're interested in picking up the book, you do so after, because I'll be around to sign it and talk about the Coens if you like. Thanks to Tiff for having me, and enjoy.